Welcome to today's webinar, a continuation of the education series. The title today is University's Grand Purpose Misses the Point of Education, featuring our presenter, Barry Cooper. And I've already begun a bit of an interview with Barry as we were warming up for the session. So welcome for today. This will not be our concluding session. The concluding session is next week, where we'll be bringing the presenters of the last month together under with John Berger as the facilitator. So if you enjoyed today, for sure, show up for next week as well. So Barry, tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're here today, and your experience within the realm of higher education.
Well, I was an undergraduate at UBC many years ago, and it was still there were still people there that had taught my mother. My dad went to U of A; he was a doctor. And then I went to Duke for my PhD. At the time, that was the place for good Canadian students to go. There was a time where every major university in this country had a Duke graduate, at least one. At one point, there were 4 of us at the University of Calgary. And it was because of a guy who was in the OSS in World War II and founded something called the Commonwealth Studies Center. And he brought in, he made a lot of funding from the Ford Foundation, but he brought in, good graduate students from all over the Commonwealth, not just the white settler Commonwealth, but from sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia as well. And it was probably the most enjoyable time in my life. At the time, there was no interstate between Durham and Washington or Atlanta. So once you were there, it was an 8-hour drive to get to another big city. So I loved it because I didn't want to go anywhere. And there were about 4 million books in the Duke Library. It was just terrific.
What brought you back to Canada?
Well, I always thought I would come back here. I did my PhD on a French philosopher, a guy named Maurice Merleau-Ponty. He was a friend of Jean-Paul Sartre, and I had to find a job from Paris, and the only people that wanted me were at Bishops in the Eastern Townships in Quebec. So that's where I got my first job. There were some American positions, but I didn't particularly want to stay in the States. I mean, I was quite happy there, but so I taught for 1 year at Bishops, and then the second term I also taught at McGill, and that was rather fun. But then through a mix-up with hiring at McGill and York, I ended up at York. And I was there for the best part of a decade before I came to Calgary.
So the reason that you caught my eye was some of the, I'll call them provocative, some of the editorials which you're a well-known writer, but you're rather forthright in your perspectives about the state of leadership, the state of universities, the relevance of learning vis-a-vis other functions that people have been attributing to universities. Share with me, some of the broader perspectives that you have about our university culture environment today.
Well, I would say that the last time that we had a scholar as a president was when Norm Wagner was president, and that was in the 1980s. Since then, we've had mostly people from professional faculties, and quite frankly, they're well trained, but they've never really had to think very much about the major questions that I think still animate undergraduates. So that they've then formed the university in their own image of what they think a university should be, which by and large is to be ancillary to the surrounding society rather than something that challenges the conventions that seem to operate in like everyday society. that's one of the things that I think political philosophy does, is it does challenge these things. Starting the last two presidents, including the present one, they're very strongly in favor of what they think of as entrepreneurship, which is, so far as I can tell, is little more than inventing stuff. It's not intellectual entrepreneurship. So that leaves them pretty much open to the latest kinds of fads in administration, not just for universities, but in the corporate world as well. So we've got I don't know how many hires we've had in inclusion, diversity, and equity in the last couple of years, but it has certainly, let's say, increased the amount of money that undergraduates have to pay for their education that they never had to do, say, 15 years ago. And I don't think it's improved their education much.
Well, some might argue that we built our universities, we built our educational system in the interests of education, in the belief that this was a means of helping to civilize our state, but also to not just create jobs, redistribute wealth, have a state where people will get along, contribute, and grow. And you can see economics beginning to creep in, particularly in the public sector, where the financing of our universities are public. It's coming from the state. And yet we seem to be getting aligned with some of industry's interests in the last quarter century or so. Is that really what's happening? Are we just looking at more multiple sources of financing our education of our society?
Well, I can really only speak about this place. I mean, I've read other things, but it's not sort of top of mind. I'll tell you a story that about the third or fourth year I was here, I was on a scholarship committee, and it was a graduate scholarship committee, and I kept voting down what I thought were absolutely ridiculous PhD proposals, mostly, as it happened, from educational psychology. And the dean at the time was a very, very nice, witty guy. He was a genuine scientist. He said, well, you don't seem to like ed psych. And I said, I have no views about ed psych at all. I just think these are absolutely moronic proposals. And I said, but I will say nothing if the next time one of these comes up, you just read out the title. And if you can read it out without laughing, I'll just be quiet. And of course he couldn't. It was some absolutely silly thing. So then about a month later, he asked me to suggest what I thought the structure of the university looked like. And so I did, because we were spending, in my view, we were spending a lot of money on students that basically didn't need it, say in the law school or med school. And so I said, well, there are three kinds of departments in this university. There are the core academic departments in arts and science. There are the professional schools that are secondary. That would include law, medicine, and engineering. And they probably have a place in the university, not a central one, but a significant one. And then I said there are these credentialing departments and faculties, including, say, social work and education, that I said basically have no point in being in a university at all. And why we should spend any money on them, I just find beyond belief. And he said that he would then present it to GFC, the General Faculty's Council. I mean, I've never been on GFC, so I don't know what happens there. He told me a couple of weeks later that they didn't like it very much, especially the people in education and social work. And I said, yeah, but do they have any arguments? And he said, well, no, they didn't. Now, that's kind of the point you were making, is that we have to supply well-trained people, and those are the secondary faculties. It's better to have a doc that knows what he's doing, or an engineer that builds a bridge that doesn't fall down. But those are not central to what the university is. That's arts and science, period. It's very medieval. I know that, but I minored in medieval history when I was a graduate, so I thought that was probably important.
Well, you've helped answer a question for me that's been simmering for many years. I was a consultant with KPMG and asked by the university to do a review of the Department of Education when the president of the U of A at the time, Paul Davenport, wanted to close down the education faculty entirely. He also wanted to close down dentistry, which I fortunately was involved in saving, but education also got saved, but for different reasons I never did understand. And I think you've helped me to understand it or look at it as a credentialing faculty. And I think Paul Davenport probably would have agreed. I certainly do. Okay.
Yeah, I never met him. I knew him by reputation. I think he probably would.
Yeah. Well, there at least was an individual taking a stand on a substantive position that would have addressed and was addressing the issue of the mission. And I think you pointed out already today that the mission of the Canadian University may be shifting a bit and has been shifting for some time. But why are we hiring leaders that don't seem to be able to take a stand anymore? Are things so complex among the various interests within the university that it's just become an impossible assignment? Do we need to ask government to give us a new mission?
I think the people who go into administration, and this is speaking from observation, so it's a kind of empirical generalization rather than a psychological profile, is they get bored with teaching. I only know of maybe 3 people, Tom Flanagan, Dave Berkeson, and a guy named Cooper Langford, who had high positions in the senior administration, who then went back to the classroom. The other people who have had these positions have reluctantly, if they've been compelled, because they weren't very good administrators either, compelled to go back to their departments, haven't liked it very much at all. And one of the consequences is that you get this cadre of, let's say, professional administrators who don't want to go back to the classroom or to the lab. And so they don't. They search their way into, let's say you can be a dean at a fairly good place like this. But if you don't want to go back to a classroom, then you search around for becoming a provost at a third-rate university or college someplace, because you're scared out of your wits that you can't do it anymore. And by and large, they can't.
But what are the criteria for advancement when you're in administration?
I think they're identical as they are in all bureaucracies. You have to, let's say, be properly subservient to those above you. And if you do that, then you'll get promoted.
Subservience, accumulation of a bigger budget, growth, not necessarily performance, but the bigger the budget, the more the power. The more the power, the more influence. Just seems to be never ending. It's
yeah, and none of that. I mean, if we had a rule or even a tradition that said you can go into administration from, say, a dean to central administration for no more than 1 term, which would be 5 years. And then you had to go back to your department and do your job. I think things would be a lot better. They'd certainly be a lot different. You would not have these career bureaucrats who, quite frankly, are so out of touch with the central purpose of arts and science that they just make our life miserable if you pay attention to. I mean, basically, what I do is just try and do my own work, and which includes writing things that I know will irritate them, and because as I said, I haven't done committee work for quite a while, and I don't intend to do it again.
We had a good discussion last week with Mark on the relevance of the liberal arts, which seem to become secondary in the domain of entrepreneurship and the professional schools. And yet, when you talk about being provocative, you raise it in such a way that it's a learning technique, that there are times when you poke a little bit in order to orchestrate a discussion, not wanting to get interpersonal, but to stay focused on topic. Do you enjoy being provocative? I mean, you obviously write quite a bit, and it is provocative, and it does cause people to think. What inspires you?
It is enjoyable. I mean, anybody who says that they don't like popping balloons are not being entirely frank. It's, I mean, one of the things that I teach them the early Plato's dialogues on Socrates.
Mhm.
And in one of them, in the Apology, actually, when he was on trial, he says that it's not unpleasant to, destroy the pretensions of blowhards. And it isn't. I mean, anybody who says it is, I think is not telling the truth at all. But it's also a kind of, it's also creative. It's a way of at least for me anyway, of staying abreast of politics. I mean, the more academic research I do is so far away from everyday politics that if I wanted to, I would simply not pay any attention to it. It's the book I'm working on now is on the Neolithic, things like Stonehenge as political structures. Now, most of my colleagues think that's crazy, but it's an argument that is so far removed from, say, the well, I don't know, the carbon tax, that to keep my hand in with real politics, one of the ways of doing that is just to write these op-ed kinds of articles.
Well, there's something, and I don't know whether this is different or this is just my personal perspective, but over the years, having come out of a liberal arts program and loving the issue of debate and discussion, I've seen a turn at the university where things have become interpersonal. It's one thing to have a Plato discussion or an Aristotle discussion, or even discuss politics and discuss the issue, but all of a sudden it seems to become very interpersonal, and the issue seems to get lost in whether you're a good guy or a bad guy, regardless of what the argument. Why has discourse become so personal? Any perspectives to share in that regard?
Probably, not. I mean, because I haven't found that. When we were talking about this earlier, that when I discuss, say, the Gorgias, that's what I was talking about today in class. There's in the third part of this, there's a big conflict between Socrates and a politician named Callicles, and it's really clear that they are on complete different sides of the aisle on how you should live your life. And you can talk about that, at least I could talk about that in class, and the students would take it up as an interesting kind of existential question that addresses them as it has addressed people for 2,500 years, and that's fine. In the other class that the seminar that I'm teaching tomorrow is called On War and Interpretation. And one of the differences that I've noticed there is that the students, when they talk about war in the sort of, in terms of their own recollections, they make reference to their families, mostly to their fathers or grandfathers. But what's interesting is that it's not like it was, say, 25 years ago, when we were talking about fighting in the Canadian Army, say, or the RCAF, or the Navy, or something like that. These guys are from their families are from all over the world, and they talk about. Like I have one student whose his grandfather fought both for North Korea and for South Korea. And he started at the beginning of the Korean War, and he was a grunt in the North Korean army, and then he deserted and became a soldier in the South Korean army. And so he could talk about this. There were other students who talked about their grandparents who were on the Indian and Pakistan side of the independence wars of those two countries. So the kind of what we now call intersectionality of the students has changed, but they still are happy to address the problems. They just contextualize it differently. And in the war class, the problems are basically, I mean, we start off with chimpanzee wars, and tomorrow we're talking about the Somalia disaster with the Americans. The problems sort of stay there, and the students are able to see that. And even though they contextualize it in terms of their own families, which is new, and I find it quite interesting.
One of the things that I'm witnessing, and I think we're all witnessing, is what some alluded to in our earlier webinars, that universities have become bastions for activism, and feel that when we talk about losing sight of their mission, some feel that the universities have become a location where students learn to become activists, whether it be in high school or maybe it's within the school, the K-12 before they get to university, where maybe they sober up. But whether it be convoys, or whether it be challenges to free speech, or whether it be women's rights, or whether it be diversity, inclusion, and equity, these things have now come out into the streets, and universities seem to be the bastions of heating up those arguments. And if you're not aligned, you end up finding yourself personally confronted, not the argument, but you're asked, where do you stand? And if you don't stand on the right side, you're automatically assumed to be on the left side, or right, left, whatever.
There was an interesting thing that happened last year I teach an introductory course on ideology every second year, and one of the students wanted to address the class to tell them that they were having a student strike on the outside in front of the administration building in about a week or two, and could he tell the class what it was all about? And I said, sure. So he did, and then the organizing committee wanted all the political science classes to be canceled. And I said, no, that's not going to happen. I'm going to, if the students want to show up, I'll talk. They did. But then the student activists, the guys who were putting on this demonstration, brought in some of their colleagues with whistles and, disruptive devices and bullhorns and things to disrupt the class. And I said, look, this was not part of the deal. I said, you could tell them what they were doing. Yeah, we said, well, we changed our mind. And I said, okay, you're going to have to explain yourself to the class next time, because I can't, obviously talk with some, idiot blowing a whistle. And the students were so irritated that this guy had told them something that turned out not to be true. Now, he said that the committee changed their mind. And I said, well, that still doesn't cut it.
Right.
Why are you still with them? And the students just were really infuriated. They said, yeah, you lied to us. You lied to us. And I thought, yeah, good, you got it.
So the students served as a vehicle to challenge.
Oh, absolutely.
I want to raise another question, and that is, have the universities been turning left? And it's a political question, but I mean, the reality is one of the challenges society seems to be having today about universities is, have they become places of social indoctrination and forgetting the mission of, learn to be critical thinking, becoming, we'll tell you what to be critical of, as opposed to how to think your way through an argument. Are the universities losing their moral compass?
Well, there's certainly a lot of evidence of that, put it that way. I'm not entirely sure again, from my own experience, how widespread it is. I don't think it's a big deal in political science. It may be in, I don't know, sociology or something like that. Certainly in these credentialed places like social work, I'm sure that's the orthodoxy. But there was a time about, say, starting about from 20 years ago to about 10 years ago, when there was this entity called the Calgary School that was denounced fairly widely as being conservative. And, some of the guys are conservatives, or were, like Ted Morton was a conservative MLA. Flanagan worked for Stephen and so on. But I've never thought of myself as conservative. Everybody else seems to, but that's, I consider that their problem, not mine. But the point is that we all saw ourselves as just engaging in non-Marxist analysis of, say, Canadian politics. Mm-hmm. And this meant that we had to be conservatives. Well, that just shows, let's say, a poverty of thought. They know nothing. I mean, anybody who says that knows absolutely nothing about the history of liberalism and conservatism, which is fine. Nobody's compelled to know stuff, but still, you should just keep your mouth shut if you don't know what you're talking about.
Well, that would be original for activists,
wouldn't it?
I'm gonna turn to the chat and shift gears for a moment. Greg McGilvery raised a point. You had discussed or made reference to education as credentialing, and he's also questioning whether business education is simply a form of credentialing. Do we really need to go to university to learn how to manage a business? Does that fall in the same category of credentialing as education does?
Yeah, I think it does. Ed McNally was a good friend of mine. I mean, he died about 4 or 5 years ago now. He was asked to give a talk at the Haskayne Business School, and Haskayne was a very successful oil and gas guy. He came out of Gleason, Alberta, which is like a widening of the road. And Ed was initially he was a lawyer and a rancher and farmer, and then he started the Big Rock Brewery. So he had a lot of entrepreneurial experience as well as this kind of professional oil patch experience. And he was asked by the guys at Haskayne to give a course on entrepreneurial, and he was absolutely appalled at the bureaucratic mentality of the students in the business school. And I said, he would say, what are they doing over there? And I said, look, I don't know. I hardly go there. I don't know what they do.
What was it that appalled them? The lack of life experience, the lack of understanding what the challenges are of management? I mean, if that applied to the student, it probably applies to the professors, few of whom have ever been in business. No, exactly. I think the larger context for all of these things is modern technology, including administrative technologies, that you can homogenize the med school and the business school using the same models, probably the same computer programs, and it seems to work because you're just dealing with commodified intelligences, and you're not talking about thinking. That you can't do that with thinking, and that's why I always would include science in the core faculties, and including mathematics, obviously, and why these other credentializing places like the business school and the law school and why they don't teach their students to think. They just turn them into administrators, and they can administer anything. Well, this has been one of my concerns, and I think Mark echoed it last week, is that if I'm going to put a scalpel in the hand of someone, I would hope they've got some foundations in the arts, that they are humanists, and the same with engineers, and the same with anyone in any one of those professions, that you would think there'd be a foundation degree or a foundation course or a core that would provide a foundation for them to be working from. And yet they argue, look, our curriculum is loaded with all of the mechanics of our profession. We don't have time to be talking about values.
Yeah.
What a
Yeah.
society we're building if values aren't relevant in the practice of a profession. Or am I exaggerating the problem?
Well, I mean, first of all, that I would say that the discussion, anytime you use the word values, you're so already committed to sort of Nietzsche's understanding of what used to be called virtues, that it becomes sort of subjective, and you can't really discuss values rationally, I don't think. So that's the first problem. But then, if you buy into values talk, then you're also buying into the possibility of administering everybody. Just different values, some people do this, some people do that, but we can all be subordinate in terms of what we used to call instrumental rationality to turn us into productive human beings. As they say, the slogans all over this university at the moment are things, invent something.
I'm in favor of talking about values. What we do when we talk about values is we ask about their coherence with other sets. I mean, if you accept, say, respect for the moral and intellectual autonomy of others, then what does that imply about aspects of personal relationships in, say, the classroom or in the job or whatever? We want to talk about values. And yes, I'm with Perry. I think that whatever profession you seek to go into, you would want to talk about the things that the people in arts and humanities and the social sciences are talking about, just for interest's sake, and not necessarily because you think it's going to make you a better thinker or more sensitive to ideas, although it will do that. But just for the sake of exploring these issues.
Well, no, I'm just saying that the language of values is not the language that we use in at least in the history of political science. That we talk about some things are true and some things are not true. And values always, let's say, shades off to what in modern philosophy is subjectivity, which is I think is inescapable. But I don't think that modern philosophy exhausts philosophy, and certainly doesn't political philosophy. So that there are no values in Plato. There are no values, I would say, really before Nietzsche. But you can find it. I suppose you could find it if you wanted to look hard enough. You can find it anywhere. But if you use the language, that kind of language, it doesn't, let's say, easily allow itself to be rationally resolved through agreement about what the right major problems are. I don't think.
Well, I think I agree with you. I think that's true. I'm not so sure about you can't find values in Plato. You'd have to tell me a bit more about what you mean. But yeah, I don't think I'm happy to hold that different value systems are incommensurable. I don't think that precludes investigating them, or even that people change their minds, though they aren't going to be changing their minds on evidence. I mean, there's no evidence. We like different things for sure, but we can still talk about what we like and how it fits together, or fails to fit together, as the case may be. So I don't know if we're disagreeing. I don't see that that the fact about I put it this way: each of us values many things for their own sake, but nothing is valuable intrinsically. Nothing is valuable for its own sake. And we value things for their own sakes, but that doesn't preclude critical discussion of what we value.
Well, you were concerned that the usage of word values leaves us into subjective discussion. So what? I mean, it seems to me that's where conflict lies. And if philosophy is going to help us in resolving conflict and learn about how one uses conflict in order to resolve issues, which is politics, we live with discussions on value, and I can't imagine that it's ever been any different. When someone has X and another has got Y, they may want to rationalize that distribution. That gets into values. Aren't we helping in the liberal arts people learn how to have discussions of that nature without necessarily resorting to a value called violence?
Well, the way I would put it is that we have different opinions, and
Okay.
and we can certainly justify or at least attempt to justify our opinions in light of something that's not an opinion. And with the problem with values is that ends the conversation. It doesn't. Whereas with opinions, it just begins it. I mean, that would be the argument. And with respect to Plato, there are virtues, eratai, in Plato that are not values. They're not. They simply are what they are. Their mode of being is, I mean, Plato says, is non-existent. So they're not things that come into being and pass away. But with values, they are somebody's values, and they always come into being and pass away with the person who holds them, and they can change their mind. That's why, I mean, that's why I did. That's a sort of long reason why I don't use that kind of terminology.
Okay, so let's weigh in on opinion on an issue that is probably as relevant today as it's ever been, and that is the government has an opinion today that universities' performance should be and funding should be tied. So what criteria do we use if we don't want to call them values? We're going to have an opinion, a discussion on opinions. There are governments that today believe that universities should be held accountable, and accountable means that they are going to introduce measures regarding academic or economic performance. How does a government, an owner of the public educational system, how do we weigh, or how can the university and the government have a discussion on the opinions that differ about what is relevant to society and the university?
The way that the universities have abused their privileged position, I think that they have they've got a lot of problems. And they will have a great deal of difficulty in defending themselves because, by and large, universities have, let's say, forgotten what their major task is, so that they seem to be defenseless when you have these technocratic people in government and in the senior administration saying we have to be productive. Mm-hmm. That's not the purpose of a university. Never has been. It's maybe the purpose of parts of what are now universities, but you don't get an arts degree or a science degree in order to be productive. You get it because you're interested in the truth about reality.
That's rich. I mean, I'm taken aback a little bit, wanting to think that through. If we're not, because we've become so used to using the word productivity, and for those that are challenging industrial dimensions of our society today, and everybody needs to be productive. And as you get older, and you are no longer as valuable because you are not as productive economically as you were. Somehow your value deteriorates. We seem to be living in a society where, if the university is going to be relevant, what other values can it say are relevant to our future other than productivity? And you say thinking.
Yeah, truth.
Now AI has come along. I'm going to shift gears dramatically here. Now AI has come along saying, well, we have the capacity. We're getting closer and closer to be able to think. What is it doing to the university today? Is it afraid? Does it dismiss the relevance of artificial intelligence and its future, or is there a new player in the game?
I think it depends who you asked. If you ask somebody in computer science, they would say it's the future. I tell the students that not to use AI for their papers. And I said, not just because it's dishonest, that will not persuade everybody. But that an AI written paper is very easy to detect because there are no spelling mistakes. The grammar is correct, and they're generally boring. And I said, when you write something, that it's your own work, it's generally not boring because you're actually struggling with something and you make grammatical mistakes and sometimes you don't know how to spell. Well, AI is just the opposite. So said, and if it's detected, there are ways that now apparently, I mean, I don't mark the term papers. I got a TA that knows how to do computers to do this. And I said, the TAs know how to run it through a program that will detect whether it's an AI product or it's plagiarized or anything like that. So don't do it. It's stupid. As well as being dishonest, it's also stupid. So don't do it. And so far as I know, I mean, this is obviously not proof of anything, but nobody does. I don't know that they don't, but maybe I just can't detect it, and maybe what I said is wrong. But I do know that AI does not make grammatical errors, and students do.
So I don't think you're going to stop it.
No.
I'm not going to. I can express an opinion, maybe even a value, that this tool exists, and people are, whether they use it at university or use it later on, it's there, and it's going to be awfully hard to stop it. Assuming it does become a working tool, like a calculator, like an automobile versus a horse.
Yeah.
That these technologies do enter society in our pursuit of knowledge, and believe it can advance us and make it more efficient and take us further into the future and maybe even become creative. These are all things that the university said it could impart, at least in the professional schools. This book, which I've cited over and over again, The Future of the Profession, says the professions are in trouble. Technology is now emerging to the point it knows more than your doctor does. It can do a better job in an X-ray analysis. You better have something other than just knowledge to impart, and it's relational skills. It's the liberal arts. It's the thinking. It's being able to understand the personal circumstances.
I remember many years ago when I was still doing this work on the French guys. There's a guy named Hubert Dreyfus wrote an article that computers must have bodies in order to think. And he went through an elaborate sort of phenomenological argument as to why this was true. And the fact that this is artificial intelligence is important because we can pretend that we are also artificial, although we're not. There's what is it? Lemaitre said he had this notion that called the man the machine. Right, l'homme machine, and he didn't say I'm a machine. That'd be crazy. But he said all human beings are just machines. Well, you can get away with something like that. That's the analogy with AI. I would say you can say yes, this is artificial intelligence, but no human being will say I am artificially intelligent.
Well, it's becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish, and I know you can say today that you may be able to detect a paper that's been written by AI versus your student, because your students are imperfect, whereas the coding or the algorithms today are in pursuit of perfect. I did talk to Richard Sutton the other day, and I said, "Are you building uncertainty into the algorithms?" And he said, "We have to. If it's going to be continuously learning, then it has to be uncertain, because it's only when there's a mismatch that a new algorithm will be written to modify the base of knowledge that it's been working from." So we've got a technology out there that is showing evidence of continuous learning, discovery, imparting, distributing, looking for new things, finding new ways. There's something going on in the world of technology that I think we all need to keep our eye on. I'm going to ask Greg. You've been chatting on the side there. Greg, do you want to bring anything further to the surface? Ask Barry a question or pose one to Mark?
I don't get universities. I really outside of my place. In the liberal arts, I get it. In the deep sciences, the engineering where people have to learn, I don't get it for business particularly well. You know, I went to drop out of third year business at St. Francis Xavier University because I didn't feel like I was getting the learning I needed. And me and some colleagues were going to start a business. And I was only an entrepreneur I knew. My dad said, don't quit, don't quit, don't quit. I was at the University of Calgary today. We have issues with our young people on communicating, on conversing. I gave about a 35-minute talk with 6 stops along the way for these students to talk amongst themselves and report what they shared. And it was unbelievable, the level of engagement that, you know, you really had to encourage them. I'm saying this is a business class. You know, it was unbelievable. So I think part of the problem might be, and I alluded to it in the chat, University of Calgary is a research institution. It's not, it cares little about learning or the student experience, yet we call them schools of higher education. Why don't we just call them research places?
Perry, Mark, you want to weigh in there on the whether or not research is overwhelming the university's mission?
Only a very particular kind of research. We have more students in the Faculty of Arts than any other of the faculties. And these kids, you know, they pay a fair bit of dough. But we don't have, we haven't had, let's say, a surfeit of hires lately. The engineering faculty got 60 positions 2 years ago, and they haven't been able to fill them. That says what the priorities are of the university, of the senior administration of the university. It's not delivering the core arts and science. It is all these other schools. And they are definitely research intensive. You know, I said earlier that I've done a lot of research in my life, and I've published a lot, not the kind of stuff that you've been talking about, but scholarly stuff. And I'm glad that I've been able to do this. I've learned a lot about the world by doing this kind of work. I'm not sure that what passes for research, what's called research, and certainly what's funded in the medical school in particular, probably in the business school. You know, as I said, I haven't been over there much. It is not research in the sense that it discovers things regarding the reality of the world. It's rather improvements on techniques, on, you know, I don't know, cancer treatment, or, you know, which is, it's important, but it's not the be all and end all of why we have universities. It simply isn't. So the fact that you have a bunch of people who think it is means they're going to make mistakes, because the students who come to university are interested in, not in improved cancer treatments. They're interested in understanding the world, understanding reality. And that's a completely separate thing than what goes on in what I would call these technologically focused faculties, which would include, you know, as Greg was saying, which would include the business school. It's just technology.
The point that Greg makes, and Mark made well last week, leads me to use the word hopeless. We've learned that the humanities are suffering dramatic declines, both in enrollment and in the hiring. And the argument in the articles that I've been reading is that society is becoming so pragmatic, whether it be we're in economic hard times, whatever the arguments may well be, and the university is being looked at as a vehicle in order to address some of the productive issues. We got low productivity in Canada. Turn to the university to see if it can give us an answer. The humanities don't have an argument when it comes to are you helping us in productivity? And I'm not saying I'm in favor. In fact, I'm dramatically afraid that we lose focus on the humanities and on the liberal arts. But it seems that the we're swimming upstream. The waterfall, the fire hose is on us, and it's begging, asking, demanding, insisting, measuring productivity. Mark? Mark, did you make this point last week? Did I hear you well when you were talking about the future of the liberal arts? And I asked you, where's the sign of hope? Is in fact the pendulum swung so far that it'll bounce back again?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a prognosticator. I think our situation is pretty bad. And as I said last week, I think there are some grounds for optimism, but then there are also plenty of grounds for pessimism. But Perry, this is a very large question. Just what is the relationship between what we might call teaching and research? I don't think that there's any in principle conflict between the two. And indeed, I think that only those scholars, those professors who are engaged in thinking about the things and investigating the world for themselves can bring the proper level of engagement to the students. In some way, what we do in teaching is let the students oversee us as or watch us as researchers, listen to us as we're going about our business, and then encourage them to go about their research business as well. What's disturbing, I think, is the spirit. When research and teaching become detached from each other, and there are institutional forces that incline professors to detach them from each other, that's when the problems arise. That's when, for some professors, having to teach classes is a burden rather than an opportunity to engage in the academic mission. So it may well be that there are some faculties or some professors, whatever we're teaching is where research is creating a problem for their teaching, but I don't think there's any in principle reason why that need be so.
But we're talking about a balance. I mean, if research is discovery and discovery is the foundation ultimately for knowledge, then there's some role. I mean, philosophy, I guess one could push and say philosophy is a form of research, investigation to better understand.
Yeah, we use the term research very, very widely. When you're working on the interpretation of a poem, that's research. And it was too bad. You have to explain this to students sometimes because they say philosophy. How's it research? But I wouldn't use the term balance. I would say that they interanimate each other. Your work in the classroom and your work in the study thinking about things, well, they contribute to each other.
I mean, we use basic versus applied. We use pragmatic versus philosophical. I mean, they're range terms. There's a subjectivity and a basis of opinion in all of this that we're talking about. And I think the bottom line is we're probably going to have this discussion forever. Management or the president plays some role in making sure there's a balance between these forces and the relevance of today's economy and tomorrow's economy in the future. There are many forces to balance here on campus. And therein lies the challenge that a president doesn't become so ideological that he's pushing you in one direction or another. Barry, do you want to weigh in on anything the Mark has shared, elaborate or challenge it?
I would just sort of make the distinction between research that is supposed to be useful, productive, and the kind of activity that does not aim at usefulness. It aims at, I mean, the Germans made a big distinction between this. It aims at understanding. And I mean, Kant said, what is the use of use? And that was not a utilitarian question. That was a philosophical question. And if the utilitarians and their directors in the various research faculties that we have can't answer that question, then we need to pay no attention to them.
I'm concerned not only with the fact that the universities are maybe not delivering, but also whether the social and economic factors of higher education are being attended to. And I keep thinking of Martin Luther King, who identified very clearly that education was primary to them having an equal society. And of course, then there was all of the stuff that came down as followed that. But, you know, I had a guy that I really liked reading, Scott Galloway, was talking about just how difficult it's getting for a young person to get an education, and secondly, to really excel in the upper echelons of education, which of course is what we regard as Harvard. I spent time in Britain, it's Oxford and Cambridge, and here it's MIT and Harvard. And this Galloway was a professor, or is a professor of business in that you all probably know about him. At MIT, I think it was MIT, and this was one of his big concerns, was just how our access to education is diminishing very rapidly with the costs that are being required to actually go to one of these places.
Your point is that the cost of education is becoming excessive?
Oh, way beyond what so many people can afford. Of course it is, yes, very obvious.
And yet the percentage of people that graduate with bachelor's degrees today is up dramatically in the last 50 years. We've certainly seen advances.
But look at the data on those people that are graduating. You know, where do they come from? They come from wealthy families, most of them.
Okay, so the second point is we need more affirmative action?
Yeah, we do need more affirmative action.
And yet we're not seeing particularly good results from affirmative action because those that are being admitted are failing because they're not adequately prepared.
It takes time. If you take a generational look at it, it's a hard one because, you know, those people are going to have to leap many, many fences. I've seen this in the British system, you know, with the upper classes, you know, like the upper classes, I'll tell you, they have so many advantages over the middle classes. And if they didn't, and I know that this is getting into discussions about sociology.
Just class warfare. I mean, we've got different classes, that's all.
I'm just saying that, look, you know, this society we have out there is just getting more and more unequal.
Well, maybe we've overplayed the relevance of getting a university degree. Maybe there's such a point, enough is enough. How much education do you really need in our society? Why does everybody need a university degree? Give me, Barry, an overview. You've got a young student. The student says, I'd like to someday be the president of a university. What's your advice to him?
Well, I'll tell you another anecdote. Years ago, one of my colleagues asked me if I wanted to be a department head, and I said no. And there was another guy who did want to be, and we said, well, can I nominate you anyway? And I said, sure. So I said, you can nominate me. So then there were two of us, and we were then summoned to the Dean's Council, which was all the other department heads plus the dean. And the head of the geography department said, why do you want to become department head? And I said, no, there's a misunderstanding. I don't really want to become department head. I said I would let my name stand with the condition that if people didn't want me, that'd be fine, but I would never do anything else similar to being department head. I'll do department committees, but I'm not, I'm simply not going to do that. And the guy looked at me and smiled and said, well, thanks for your time. And I said, you're quite welcome. It was the shortest interview for anything I think I've ever had. I don't know why people want to become university presidents. I don't know why they would go into a university if they wanted to become president. It strikes me as being a wasted life, particularly if you need to have a PhD. Well, why do you want a PhD if all you want to be is a president of a big bureaucracy? Join the civil service.
So is it possible to be a president of a university and try and erode the bureaucratic nature of that institution? Is there some way to either flatten it out, make it more fluid? What is it that we need in order to either restore or find a new mission, or restore the mission that was once so relevant?
Yeah, I think it's very much possible. There are, as I said, when I came here, Norm Wagner, who was a genuine scholar. He was an Old Testament scholar. He knew Syriac and Akkadian and some of these other languages that are extremely difficult to learn. Had written some very good books, and he did a lot of good things when he was president of this university because he knew what the purpose of it was. Since we've had various engineers and lawyers and so on since then, they didn't know, and therefore they couldn't restore the university to its purpose because they had no clue of what it was. It's always possible, but then, if you are a genuine scholar, as I said before, why you would want to waste your life being an administrator, it beggars belief. You wouldn't. Just keep your head down, do your own stuff.
Meeting I had yesterday with someone wise was maybe it's time for a convention. Are there conferences that are opening up the discussion that people gladly and openly attend to talk about this topic? I mean, this is rich. It's not a large gathering we're having today, and certainly the whole discussion around education is lacking at a public level. We seem to get into a discussion about more or less, more money, more teachers, less. We're not discussing purpose. We're not discussing mission. Is it time to have a convention?
Well, I mean, my experience is that the Americans are much better at this than we are. I've been to a number of conferences. Liberty Fund used to put them on fairly frequently, where the purpose of the university would be the main topic, and we would read a bunch of stuff that people have written over the years. There have also been some new educational institutions. There's one not in Dallas, in Austin, I think, that just been opened in the last year, that has a great books program at the center of their curriculum. There's Hillsdale in upstate Michigan, someplace. And so there's nothing similar, so far as I know, in this country. Partly because, as you mentioned, the importance of provincial governments as a source of funding. And it's partly because of our tax laws. You can't basically endow what you think of as the central part of a university and actually get a proper tax write-off for it. You can in the States. I mean, that would be one of the things I'd change, to make deductions to universities actually mean something. It's about 15% or something like that right now. So there are things that you could do.
If we were to hold a convention, I want to stay on this point for a few minutes more. If we were to hold such a convention, would it end up becoming defensiveness to maintain status quo, or are there people with ideas and that are passionate to see a leadership shift, to see the owner today begin to open up the discussion about being more tolerant of shifting from simply the public commitment? We value education, we take taxpayer money, and we will distribute it, as opposed to giving incentives to the taxpayer to fund the future. But we've got to educate Canadians that something is wrong and something could be better. And maybe conferences are one of the ways to begin to get there.
Yeah, that might be a start. I think almost anything would be worthwhile. A friend of mine, Peter Emberley, he and I had done some publishing together. He opened a basically liberal arts college in the middle of Carleton. And one of the people he persuaded to give a large chunk of money was a guy from Calgary, an oil guy from Calgary. He obviously had looked around at the University of Calgary and thought, these guys will just, add to the business school or something. But that place at Carleton, the Liberal Arts College at Carleton, does seem to be working fairly well.
We do have people who are talking about these things and organizing talks. Certainly, the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship puts on events where people come and talk about these things. There are some problems. You might know about the meeting we had in London, Ontario, most recently, where the library banned us. Joanna Williams was going to give a talk, the Friddy Lecture, one of our flagship lectures, but the library said we couldn't do it, so we had to do it in a hotel. That was too bad. But that's a problem. It's a bit of a general problem. Is that there are those on one side who see sides, and they're not going to share space with people with whom they disagree. Much of people who support the initiatives in equity, diversity, and inclusion, they're much more political, and they take winning the institution to be more important than discussing the problems. Now, that shouldn't be too much of a barrier, because we could have our conference, invite whom we want, and if they don't want to come, they don't have to, and other people could have their conferences as well. I think that would be great. One more quick thing about this. I gave a talk on teaching at St. Mary's University, my own university, recently. It was sponsored by the unit that sort of looks after teaching. They call it the studio. People in the university administration forbade them to use the university logo on the posters, even though it was in the university, a unit from that university sponsoring a professor from that university. And I think these rifts, these divisions, they run quite deep, and there are attempts to tar people who have opinions about the mission of the university, the criticisms of the direction that the university is going, that can dampen discussion. It's unfortunate. I think it's there, but I agree with you entirely. Nonetheless, we should be talking about these things. We should be talking about them publicly. We should be sponsoring talks, symposia, debates, whatever. It's a very good idea.
Barry, you got the last word. Go.
Okay. The only thing I would say is that people have been lamenting the decline of the university for generations. The German philosopher Dilthey in the late 19th century said the university is in such a mess, I'm not going to publish anything anymore. And, from his point of view, I guess it was. From the way I look at it, it's the university today still gives me an opportunity to do work that I think is important. And that's, that's a kind of liberty that you don't get, I would say, in other walks of life. So that I still think that the university will be attractive to people who have curiosity. The real problem may be that they will just have part-time jobs. So, I mean, that if productivity then becomes the center purpose of the university, you'll never attract people because you won't be able to pay them. So they'll, do something else.
Sure, we could drive universities into becoming the instruments of industry. That's one of the concerns we have, Tom.
Yeah,
the almighty dollar is what's going to drive the mission. And I think I listened to Tom Dodd a while ago that said maybe that ought to be rethought. Maybe we should understand that the universities have a value beyond just immediate economic relevance. And I think that's our wrap up today. Thank you, Barry.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you, Tom. Mel, for your diligent attention. And I'll leave it at that. So thanks, gentlemen.